Next is David Robertson with a critique of the Liberal government's plan. Dave worked for the Canadian Auto Workers for 25 years. He is a member of Seniors for Climate Action Now and the co-author of a report entitled The Liberal Climate Action Formula, a Recipe for Failure. David.
Good. And thank you for the invitation to be here, and to all of you who have come to attend this event, I'd like to thank you as well. Over the last year, Canada's climate plan has been built in fits and starts. The foundation was poured last December, and since then, various planks have been added here and there. The result is what we have today: a wobbly structure and a shifting foundation. And I'm going to review some of those developments in 3 acts. Act 1 will focus on the government's official plan. Act 2, the federal budget and the Biden summit. Act 3, the recent federal elections and the promises. In December 2020, the federal government released its official climate plan called A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy. The document amounted to a smorgasbord of about 64 climate initiatives, ranging from home retrofits to clean vehicle subsidies, from electric buses to planting trees. Some were very attractive, some very worrying. As a package, however, it was too little too late. The various initiatives suffered from inadequate funding, poor design, insufficient ambition, and they were all decoupled from expected emission outcomes. But the fault lines went deeper. The government's climate plan was characterized by 4 remarkable failings. First, it all but ignored solar and wind renewable power. Second, it put all of our eggs in the wrong basket of unproven technologies, such as carbon storage, small modular reactors. Third, it tied Canada's future to what is called blue hydrogen, or hydrogen made from fossil gas. And finally, the government's plan was more about economic aspiration than climate action. Canada was to emerge as a global hydrogen powerhouse. The wrap-up to Act 1 can be provided by the SCAN report, A Recipe for Failure. Very straightforward. The government climate plan will fail to achieve our Paris emission reduction targets. Act 2 starts with the federal budget, which was released last April. The budget tweaked a number of initiatives. It added a few new ones. It earmarked money for parks. It added some extra money to building retrofits. But announcements like these ones were completely overshadowed by the government's commitment to fossil fuels. The budget doubled down on the government's commitment to the fossil fuel industry. It provided $8 billion for big emitters. It announced a new major tax credit for fossil fuel companies in carbon storage projects. It repeated the commitment of $1.5 billion for blue hydrogen. The most significant development in Act 2, apart perhaps from the Net Zero Accountability Act, was an increase in Canada's climate ambition. Canada's emission reduction target went from 30% to 36% in the budget. And then just 4 days later, and after a phone call from President Biden, it was increased to 40 to 45%. The phone call from Biden added some drama to Act 2, but it also revealed how cavalier the government's approach was to climate pledges. There are 2 broad ways to view Canada's greenhouse gas emissions: at an economy-wide level, and more specifically on a sector-by-sector basis. At an economy-wide level, here's what we know. The production and the use of energy is responsible for 80.7% of our emissions. The main driver of increases in emissions is the growth in energy demand. We also know that in Canada, 1,700 emitters are responsible for about 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions. On a sector by sector basis, here's what we know. The share of oil, gas, and refining industry in terms of emissions is a whopping 26%. Emissions from the transport sector, 25%. The third largest source of emissions is from buildings, which produce about 12%. Taken together, those three are about 2/3 of the country's emissions. So if we know where the emissions come from, and we know the time that we've got left in which to act, a climate plan should address both of these matters, the sources and the timing. Canada's plan doesn't. From an economy-wide perspective, or a more detailed sector-by-sector approach, the government plan fails. Carbon pricing won't achieve the predicted emission reductions. The 8 billion to big emitters, a mistake. Commitment to blue hydrogen, a real problem. Small modular reactors, expensive, unproven, hazardous. Our forests are now carbon sources. Planting 2 billion trees won't change that. There's been a failure to invest in solar and wind. Building retrofits will only affect 1 in 10 houses. Prohibiting the sale of gas-powered vehicles is great. It's critical. It's 2035. It's 5 years after 2030. There is not enough money for electric buses, and on and on. The wrap-up of Act 2 goes to the report entitled Canadian Energy Outlook 2021. The extensive and detailed report by the Tortier Institute concludes, currently implemented and publicly announced measures are insufficient to reach 2030 greenhouse gas emission targets. Now, admittedly, that report was published in August, prior to the last election. Which brings me to Act 3. In the election, the Liberals promised a number of climate initiatives, and some were incredibly encouraging. But the one that stands out and the one that got the most attention from both the press and the climate action movement was this one. Quote, make sure the oil and gas sector reduces emissions at a pace and a scale needed to achieve net zero by 2050. I'll come back to that point. The lead up to COP26 saw quite a few alarming and compelling reports. Some of them are on the slide. Behind the dire warnings in the report, there is an urgent call to action. The conclusions are unequivocal. Stop fossil fuel expansion, rapidly phase out the production and burning of fossil fuels, invest heavily in alternative energy. Canada disagrees. Canada's plan moves in a different direction. As expressed by the new climate change minister, quote, we're not trying to cap production. We will be capping the amount of pollution that comes from those sectors. And that view is precisely the problem we've got. And it points to the critical failing of Canada's climate plan. In a code red world, where in the words of David Attenborough, there is only a desperate hope, Canada is the only G7 country that has failed to lower emissions. We're one of the 8 countries responsible for 70% of extraction-based greenhouse gases. Canada is still providing massive subsidies to fossil fuels, and in the budget pledged more. Canada plans to expand oil and gas production for decades to come. Canada's emission reduction target of 40 to 45% is too low to limit global warming. Canada plans to use its fossil fuels to become a global, dirty hydrogen powerhouse. Act 3 can be wrapped up by thinking about competing climate action formulas. On the left of the screen is what the government is committed to. It can be called the fossil first approach. This formula is this: carbon pricing plus dirty hydrogen plus carbon storage plus small modular reactors equals Paris 2030 and net zero. But we need a different formula. We need a different
1 minute.
We need a people and a climate first formula. That formula is this: fossil fuel phase out, plus hard caps, plus clean renewables, plus electrification equals Paris 2030 and system change. Thank you.